Dragon Warrior, yeah! Whoa, Dragon Warrior! A new role-playing epic! Holy crap! The beginning of a new era in video games! Holy shit! This is gonna be the greatest game of all time! Holy, this is amazing! Oh my god! Oh my goodness, I have never been so excited to play a video game in my life. Dragon Warrior. I have no idea what Dragon Warrior is supposed to be, but it sounds epic as hell. I can't wait, man. This is gonna be amazing.
Nintendo, what the crap is this? Where are the dragons? Where's my sword? You mean I have to read? Thou, thee, thy, Jaso? Who the heck is that?
Alright, enough insulting your intelligence. Of course I know what Dragon Warrior is. Look at my shirt, dummy. You think I'd be wearing the shirt if I didn't know what Dragon Warrior was, but I imagine that's how a lot of people reacted to seeing this game for the first time in 1989. They were clueless. They were used to action games on the Nintendo Entertainment System, at least in America.
Imagine, what would a typical stash of NES games look like back then? You might have Mario 1 and 2, Zelda 1 and 2, Castlevania 1 and 2, Ninja Turtles, Ninja Gaiden, Blaster Master, or maybe you had something weird like 3D World Runner or something kind of shitty but still a little fun like Karnov. Then you get this for free with Nintendo Power. I know, I wouldn't have given a shit. Everything is text. You have to read. Just to open a door or go downstairs, you have to open up the menu, scroll over to the special stairs command. Ugh, this sucks. Do I look like I'm in school? This isn't fun, it's work.
We all know the folklore. Dragon Quest was huge in Japan. Meanwhile, Dragon Warrior didn't even do well enough on the NES for them to bother releasing the SNES games over here. Hell, it wasn't until the last 10 years or so where we could reliably expect Dragon Quest games to get localized here in the United States. And the reason for that, the reason it didn't catch on, is all about time and place.
In Japan, kids, or I guess anyone who was playing video games at the time, were introduced to this by a completely different set of circumstances. Firstly, we had Dragon Ball, which was the hottest new hit manga and anime series. Then Dragon Quest followed, which featured promotional artwork and character designs by the same person who made Dragon Ball. It also came out 3 years earlier over there. If you were a Japanese kid in 1986, your NES library wouldn't have been nearly as impressive as the one I just went over. They might have had Mario and Mario 2, aka the Lost Levels, Zelda, but then again, maybe not. That was a disk system game, an add-on, technically a different platform that you may or may not have had. For the Famicom itself, it was regular, not Super Mario, Clue Land, Ice Climber, Hide Glide, the Tower of Druaga? Oh god. Next to the Tower of Druaga, Dragon Quest is a streamlined modern masterpiece. It's about what you had. Next to Ninja Gaiden, Dragon Warrior looks like shit. But next to Mighty Bomb Jack, it doesn't seem like such a big piece of crap anymore. Maybe that's a little harsh. The original Dragon Warrior is like visiting a museum. It falls completely outside the good-bad spectrum. It's a proof of concept. It demonstrated that video games don't always have to be memorization, reflexes, and action. They could try to place you into an adventure with strategic thinking, maybe even a storyline. Every RPG or game with RPG elements that came after is in its debt, and this game is a rite of passage for anyone who wants to appreciate video game history. I think HPR Shredder summed it up perfectly and succinctly when he said,
"The goal of Dragon Quest, in a nutshell, is to get to level 20.
Yeah, that's pretty much Dragon Warrior. That's all you need to know in a sentence. That's Dragon Warrior 1. It's grinding the game. The process of fighting random enemies over and over again until your stats, your numbers, are high enough for you to do fights with other enemies with even higher numbers. Repeat this until the game's over. The entire story is given to you by the king as soon as it starts. Thou, Edric, Ball of Light, stolen. Here's the key. The Dragon Lord must be defeated. There's also a princess, but you don't have to worry about her because she's right here in the first town. Ah, shit. The king is kind of like a dungeon master in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. He sets the quest. There's a princess to rescue and a bad guy to beat. Go forth, Have fun and adventure. When you die, the king revives you because it's his game. He's in charge. He's also the only way to save, is the only one keeping track of your experience and level. It's his kingdom. It's his quest. He's the dragon warrior. You're like his intern, just kind of doing his bidding. But it's the king who crafts the adventure. When we're fighting things, do we actually get physically stronger, or does the king just bestow upon us a new level? I don't know. I like to imagine he's the one narrating all your fights, too. Thou hast done well in defeating the slime. Thy experience increases by 1, thy gold increases by 1. Like the king's the guy handing these stats out. Because who else speaks like this in the entire game? It's him, it's the king. And as clunky as this menu that pops up when you hit A, with all these commands that would later get consolidated into a single button in almost every other RPG ever, again, it's all about time, place, and perspective. The other RPGs which inspired Dragon Warrior, Ultima, and Wizardry primarily, were on home computers, and you would have to manually type in all of these commands. If that's your expectation, that you're going to have to manually type in everything that you have to do, then a menu to go down some stairs is no big deal at all. In fact, it's quite user-friendly. You know what really put Dragon Warrior into perspective for me this latest playthrough? Going through Ultima Exodus last year, many of the things taken for granted about Dragon Warrior 1, which just make sense, weren't always obvious. In order for mechanics and tropes to be expected, they have to be invented first. Even just leveling up, for example. In Dragon Warrior, it works exactly how you're familiar with. Every time you defeat an enemy, you gain experience points. Gain enough experience points and your character gains a level. When this happens, all of your stats go up. Strength, speed, max HP and MP. Sometimes you even learn a new spell. Believe it or not, before Dragon Warrior settled this science, that's not necessarily how it worked, as I learned in Ultima Exodus, where you level up by speaking to Lord British, and even then all it did was increase your maximum HP. Levels in that game are also treated more like levels in a Mario game, as in the game adjusted to become more difficult based on what level you were at. It wasn't a denomination of how strong your character was, it was supposed to represent how far into the game you are. The encounters would change around you, it didn't matter where in the world you were, the enemies were all the same, all that mattered was your level. The higher it is, the stronger the monsters. If you wanted to raise any of your other stats, you had to pray at various shrines and donate money to charity. Your stats in that game had absolutely nothing to do with your level. That seems archaic as fuck now, because Dragon Warrior came up with this streamlined system that was much simpler, made more sense, and is more fun as well. And that's the mark of a great game, something that comes in, standardizes how leveling works, to a degree that even the Ultima series itself would use the Dragon Warrior style instead of the ones found in its own earlier games. It's rock bottom fundamental. It's Dragon freaking Warrior. The idea of walking around fighting monsters so you can walk around somewhere slightly different, fighting meaner looking monsters was a new thing. And even here, there's a little nuance. Your stat increases are random. Well, not quite, they're tied to your name, but that's effectively random. That's RNG tied to an element that you control, but it's not transparent or anything. There's also a secondary level up system, and that's where the gold comes into play. Defeating enemies not only grants you experience points, but money. And a lot like in Ultima Exodus, you buy stat increases. You just do it in a way that makes more sense. You buy new equipment, which then in turn increases your stats. Instead of the game's economy having one lone sword, one bow and arrow that you buy just to have a variety of weapon types, you get a clear succession, a line of weapons which are each functionally the same, just with better stats than the last, but also more expensive. In this case, you have the copper sword, the broadsword, and the flame sword, costing 180, 1,500, and 9,800 gold respectively. Each better than the last, each exponentially more expensive than the last. This equipment acts as a secondary leveling system. When you die in this adventure, you don't lose progress, you don't lose EXP, but you do lose money, half of it. Sometimes it's worth it to reset to preserve your gold, but maybe not if it's been a while since you last saw the king. Who's the real villain of this game? It's not the Dragon Lord, it's that asshole king who steals half your gold every time he revives you. The stakes become about surviving fights. It's about surviving the grind. It's a system that keeps you balancing risk and reward, inching towards the next big upgrade. There'd be no stakes to battling otherwise, because you'd still retain your experience points and the world is so small. The only thing you're really losing is money, which is also time. You're incentivized to spend, not hoard or save. Once you have enough money for the next upgrade, you don't want to risk losing any of it, so buying the next piece of equipment is like banking those resources. I don't know if I would call the system as it's implemented here fun per se, but it's rock solid. It's pre-war, as Tim Rogers once said. It was enough to build the most successful gaming franchise in Japan around anyway.
So you could be a chump and play the game with this controller, a regular NES pad, but then you gotta keep hitting A to fight the enemies, and who the hell wants to do that? I want to be able to kill my red slimes instantly, so what I did was I moved on to using this, the NES Advantage, because it has turbo functionality. You press this down, you hold down the button, and the slimes die automatically. But then I discovered something even better. Get yourself one of these, a flight stick. Unplug this piece of crap controller. Plug it in, plop it on top of the TV, and you can play one-handed because there's A and B both on this. The other hand, have yourself a drink. Bam! Never have to play Dragon Warrior with two hands ever again.
So now that I have the right controller, what else do I need to play this game? Well, according to Nintendo of America, you also need this strategy guide. Seriously, it came with an entire full game walkthrough. It kind of makes the manual, which is also included, redundant, but this is a welcome inclusion nevertheless. It also came with a world map, a poster, and a handy level card that even has guidelines for where in the game you're supposed to be. It also came with this yellow handy hint card telling you to collect the treasure chest in the king's room? Thanks, I think. I don't know if this is a guide game, as in I don't know if you need one. It's not overly cryptic, but if you do want one, if not this official guide, Mike's RPG Center has you covered, of course, for 2 and 3 as well. Not 4 for some reason, though. What do you have against 4, Mike? Dragon Warrior does have some puzzles, though. There's the famous walk around the edge of the town merchant who sells keys, and they hint at it very well with this NPC inconspicuously placed outside the boundaries of this town. That's cool, right? Even in the first game, the granddaddy of all RPG-dom, they're already deconstructing this limitation of having an overworld in a separate town area. And that's another entire jar of worms we could go down. Dragon Warrior 1 did not invent the overworld, but again, it's this standardization. Instead of a continuous game screen, there's 2 different modes. A zoomed-in literal view, which is what you see inside of towns or dungeons, and a more abstract world map that represents some kind of non-proportional, non-literal travel screen. Like is told strictly through the graphics of the game, this entire castle that you were just inside of is now as large as you when you're outside. It's not to scale, it's a different view. And the world map system is a great way to structure areas. Mario didn't do this, not yet anyway. Zelda didn't do this, and then 2 did. And they got it from this game. Connecting all your sub-areas together with an overworld, it's cohesive, it adds to making the world feel more connected, and it makes you feel more like you're on a grand adventure, where you've traveled many miles across vast landscapes, through poison marshes to abandoned, destroyed towns, through caves, until you reach the final goal of the game, aka level 19 in the Dragon Lord's Keep. Famously, it's visible from the very start of the game, and I remember this area being much larger than it actually is. Compared to the rest of this game, it's ginormous, but I've seen some shit, man, and it's not too bad. In fact, it's downright simple compared to a lot of other games I've played. The final boss is actually 2 final bosses. First, the meek human Dragon Lord, then the dragon he turns into, which is the start of a long-standing JRPG tradition of multi-form end fights. Final playtime was 13 hours, 47 minutes, and I streamed the whole thing right here on this channel.
So over the years, Dragon Warrior 1 has become mine and many others' go-to example for a basic, bare-bones RPG. I say it all the time.
Dragon Warrior 1, something infamously basic and reliant on grinding to advance, it is Dragon Warrior 1 levels of a transparent number game. They're not fun. classic Dragon Warrior-esque grind fest.
Every game with experience points, dating back to Dragon Warrior, is subject to the grind.
It's very Dragon Warrior 1. The spells aren't quite as blunt as Hurt and Hurt More, but Bash comes pretty close.
Looking back on this, yeah, it's work, but it's also a classic, up there with all of the mid-80s pioneers. Mario, Metroid, Zelda, Dragon Warrior. Who could hate on this? It's immune from any and all criticism because it's so ancient, it's so old, it's so groundbreaking, and it's so simple that it's downright charming. Any sticks and stones that might be hurled this game's way, it's pretty much immune from all criticism. Not true for the sequel, however. For whatever reason, for some reason, this game gets a pass, but this one doesn't. This one is probably the most hated game in the entire series, and I've always found that interesting.
That's strange, right? Why is this? Was the situation really so much different 9 months later? Dragon Quest II in Japan was still a pre-Final Fantasy, pre-Phantasy Star RPG by almost an entire year, too. 11 months. It's also better than Final Fantasy 1-2, yeah, I went there. It's not well balanced, sure, but show me an RPG this old which is. The first game, rightfully might I add, gets a pass for inventing this entire genre, but instead of giving credit to the sequel for improving upon that foundation, it's derised for being uneven. Well, I won't hear it. I think Dragon Warrior 2 is a wonderful game. It's no 3, which I'll get to someday, but it's such an improvement over the original in every way. I'm comfortable removing the proof of concept label off of this entry. It's a fully fledged JRPG, with as much substance as you would expect from the genre. So much so that this should have been the game Nintendo of America chose to release here first in 1989, not the original. Even a lowly 3 years later, that was too old to compete with what was out at the time. Sure, it means that here and now we would have been stuck missing a game over here, which would suck, but if I'm going to play Captain Hindsight, my goal is going to be to make money, and 2 would have made a much stronger first impression. They also could have chosen 3, that's how long it took to bring the original over here. Japan already had 1 through 3, but I get why not. That was a bigger translation job. That one definitely took more effort to localize. I think 2 was bite-sized enough that it would serve as a good entry point, but it's not so basic that it would turn people off like 1 did. Anyway, as told in gaming legends, Dragon Warrior bombed in America so hard that Nintendo decided to liquidate their inventory by including free copies with Nintendo Power. After this, Nintendo of America was not interested in converting the rest of the games, so Enix themselves took a stab at it. And I'm glad they did. But I believe they gave up too early, because maybe it's just rosy, unrealistic thinking, but if Dragon Quest V came out in 1992 for the Super Nintendo in America, I don't know, I feel like it would have done pretty well. The library was slim enough at the time, I think the series would have gotten a second look. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. Dragon Warrior 2 is where the classic, iconic fairy tale storytelling the Dragon Quest series would become famous for really got its start. This is where the series becomes recognizably structured like a Dragon Quest game. You have a party now, that's huge, right? Not only that, you also don't begin the game with them, you find both of them while adventuring, which is cool. Not the first title to do this, it's an Ultima 4 thing, but the way it's done adds a bit of that whimsy. You have to play telephone with the first guy, in my game Numo, where you'll go to a town, they'll say, "Geez, you just missed him, he went over to the castle." So then you go to the castle and he's not there, but some other NPC will tell you to go somewhere else. It's just this whole rigmarole on and on until you actually run into him finally and he joins your party. It's cute, it's a little annoying, but not so much so because the world's pretty small at this point and there's not a lot of locations to go to. Then there's Kaylin, who is actually a dog that follows you around in this one town. So you have to find an item by using the search command on the world map and then use it on her. The last game did this search for a key item thing too. It's the same puzzle as the last game where you got Erdrick's Mark, which is one of the last things you do there, but here it's front-loaded in the first, like, 20% of the game. The turned into a dog quest wouldn't have been out of place in something like Dragon Quest XI. It's exactly the kind of thing that this series would later lean into heavily. Gaining a new party member rules because it's much more of a power boost than leveling up could have possibly ever been in the first game. even if they're both a lot worse than the starting character is. You're the one carrying this team. The main guy learns no magic, he's just a fighter, but he does his job better than anyone else does theirs. Kaylin is the mage, learns a good mix of attacking and healing magic, so she's useful in her own way and absolutely necessary. But Numo, on the other hand, he's just fucking terrible. He's like the little brother that can't really do anything on his own, but you have to bring him anyway, because the king said so. The idea is supposed to be that he's a half step between Jaso and Kaylin, capable of both physical and magical abilities. Only problem is they don't let him equip anything more powerful than an iron spear, which is an item you buy at the second weapon shop in the game. So he hits for shit damage, and after a certain point he becomes worthless, completely worthless with normal attacks, which means that he's regulated to just a pure magic user. But because he's sort of a hybrid, he has a lot less MP than Kaylin. He doesn't learn Heal All, which is necessary late game. He doesn't learn Explodet, which is again necessary to actually dealing damage late game. Numo's just here for the ride, man. He's a meat shield. He doesn't get good enough at physical or magic to really contribute meaningfully in either way. The one thing he does get is Revive, which is cool, but it also happens like at the end of the game. Even so, that's not bad for party construction. You got your physical, you got your magic, and you got an in-betweener. That's a classic setup. A step up in complexity from just one solo adventure for sure, and that's really the root of all evil with this game. You can explain everything there is to explain about Dragon Warrior 2 by that one word, complexity. It's a more complex game. Everything positive and negative can be derived from this reality. It's Dragon Warrior 1, but more of it. That step up in ambition comes with both growing pains and the benefit of it being larger. It's not balanced as well because it's more difficult to plan for a party of 3 fighting a horde of monsters than it is for one-on-one encounters. But on the flip side, now you have more party members and fights are much more strategic. The puzzles are more ambitious, which also leads to them being more obtuse. This game came with a strategy guide as well, just like the first one, but I don't have that. Luckily, Mike has my back because there were multiple points with solutions that I would consider too cryptic. Kaylin the dog, I think, is perfect. That's something that I figured out on my own and felt good about. But something like finding rogue fast fingers, I don't believe the in-game hints are nearly strong enough. I think all you get is this NPC saying, I locked Rogue Fastfinger in prison and threw away the key, but he escaped. So you go in there, and sure enough, it's empty. But not really, because he's hidden in the wall. Huh? I don't know if I ever would have figured this out. Why would I randomly start using the talk command on walls? This is another thing where that menu needlessly complicates everything as well. In Final Fantasy, where there's no menu, the A button is context sensitive, this is a sort of a more manageable secret to find, because if you just hit A against the wall, you'll talk to him. But in this game, you would have to know specifically not to search on this tile. Not only would you have to know to use the talk command, you would have to know what way to face when you're using the talk command. I don't know, this just seems like something that if I were a kid playing this game, I would have been stuck here forever. In fact, there are tons of moments in this game where interacting with invisible passages or doors is required. Each one of them probably would have had me stuck for months. Just in Hargon's castle alone, you have to use the jailer's key on this inconspicuous spot. And here, it looks like a dead end, right? Nope, there's a hidden staircase inside of the wall. But on the flip side, the increased ambition leads to some of Dragon Warrior 2's best moments. In the first game, you could technically go anywhere at any time, but not really. There were very little physical roadblocks or item gates requiring you to do something beforehand to access. The only thing stopping you from going anywhere is how strong your character is. But that does act as a strict gate where you can realistically go. 2, on the other hand, is a game where you can truly do most things in any order, realistically, after a certain point. The first quarter of the game progresses much like the original, whereas you're kind of funneled through land, mostly gate kept by how strong your party is. Then you recruit your 2 friends, and there's this brutal walk from the town of Hamlin down through the forest, past Moonbrook, which is destroyed, that's not a useful castle, don't be fooled, through the monolith, across the desert, north up through the mountains. A huge walk. even if you were just going to another town. But not so fast, my friend, because after all of this is a dungeon, a tower to be in fact, which is new to the series in this game. Another staple which got its start here. You gotta climb the tower all the way to the top and then jump off so you land on the other side of the river. It's tenacious. And Dragon Warrior 2 loves to include the overworld as a part of its dungeon design. The journey up to this tower is as much a part of the tower as the area itself. Of course, this moment is a little foreshadowing for the infamous endgame. The reward, though, for going through all this is Leon Port, and most importantly, the boat. One of the best feeling and freest boats in RPG history, might I add, because it opens up the entire world map. There is not a single area in the entire game you cannot go as soon as you get this boat. And it's the most incredible feeling. Later Dragon Quest games would get so cute with multiple different vehicles, each of which only open up 1 or 2 spots, but there's nothing like that here. The boat can go everywhere and it's awesome. At this point, Dragon Warrior 2 becomes a quest for the crests. There's 5 crests, go find them, and then you can fight the final boss. And for yet another Ultima comparison, I have to point out this is the exact same setup as Exodus. Wide open world, looking for crests so you can gain entry into the final area. It's very cool how 3 tiles away from where you start on the boat is a minimized version of the entire original game's map. None of the crests are on this continent, but Tantagel Castle serves as an excellent home base. It's familiar, has easy access to both the internal and external seas, contains a save point. This game doesn't make you backtrack all the way to the start to save, but it's still only in certain towns or castles, so you want to make sure to have your go-tos, and mine was here. This middle stretch is where Dragon Warrior 2 really shines. The open seas, a treasure trove of different places to go and things to do. But most importantly, it's not grinding the game, at least through this part. The enemy balance for this section is pretty even. Sometimes you might be fighting slightly up, but it's really not a big deal. I felt like I could do any of the quests here and not be in too much danger. The outset can almost feel a little bit like Dragon Warrior 1 in the levels of grind, especially preparing for that massive walk to Liamport. That was a good hour or 2 of straight leveling before I could do this walk. And of course, we have the legendary endgame where you have to grind. If you know anything about Dragon Warrior 2 not having played it, it would be how brutal the endgame is. But I want to take a moment here to appreciate what I think works about it, because the endgame's not all bad. It's the largest combination of overworld / dungeon design. I love this cave area connecting the rest of the world to Hargon's realm. Its magnitude's more complicated than the Dragon Lord's Keep in Dragon Warrior 1, with pitfall puzzles, repeating mazes, lots of interconnecting floors, some of the best treasure in the game. This place is a feast. Playing through Dragon Warrior 2, you go to tons of different places, see many different towns and areas, but so far everything in both games has been made up of the exact same tile set. Everything has been constructed with the same building blocks so far. So there's a sense of sameness to the world. Towns are different places and they're recognizable because of the layouts and where they are on the map, but they still pretty much look the same. Corners of the earth are pretty similar in Dragon Warrior 2. That is until you step foot outside of this mammoth final cave. After you have been inching through it for hours, you've just finished going through one of the most complex areas in any RPG ever to this point. You think you've seen everything, and then blam! Snow! Wow! It's just one new tile, but it goes such a long way, adding to the ambiance of this moment. We've just climbed this massive mountain, and it really feels like it because they withheld this snow asset until so late in the game. It hits you like a ton of bricks, like stepping into air conditioning for the first time after a long day of digging trenches. The walk to Hargon's castle in the snow is brutal. The enemies are way too unpredictable. Too many of them have instant death spells, which can wipe all 3 of your party members if you're particularly unlucky. Revives are also hard to come by. There's the Leaf of the World tree, another another long-standing series staple which began here, that'll bring a party member back to life with 1 HP, but only outside of battle, and you can only have one at a time. As I mentioned earlier, Numo also learns Revive, but again, not until a very late game, and he's the one who's most likely to die anyway because he sucks. He's slow, his healing spells aren't as good as Kalen's, so Numo died the most anyway. Hargon's Mountain is officially where Dragon Warrior 2 turns into grinding the game, which, might I remind you, is all Dragon Warrior 1 is. It turns into Dragon Warrior 1 for a moment at the end. This was a couple hours of the burly back and forth slaying baboons and blue ghosts and whatever this is supposed to be, before I was actually able to do the finale. It's a good thing I have the official Nintendo grinding controller. I died just trying to grind for the camera. I'm at this is the save file I beat the game on, and I died fighting random monsters. The first one, in fact, from full health. Wow. It's not like I was trying to lose either, I just died. And even after leveling up, you just feel like you get lucky when you get through here. Because what's interesting about the final gauntlet is that none of the bosses have much HP. They all have between 230 and 250 in fact, which isn't much. The protagonist hits for around 50 damage, and Kalen's Exploded can do anywhere between 50 and 80. Numo, of course, only did 1 damage. He was awful, just worthless, but still, these should be on paper 3-turn fights. 2 of you get very lucky. Only problem is they all know how to heal themselves and spam it every single turn sometimes. They all move twice, and if the boss gets into a pattern of healing themselves with one of their 2 moves every turn, you will literally never win. You just have to get lucky. Eventually I did get lucky though, defeated Hargon and returned peace to the world. For now anyway. Ooh, scary, happy Halloween. Oh. Anyway, the video's over. That's all I have to say about Dragon Warrior and Dragon Warrior 2. Thank you a lot for 16,000 subscribers. I know this doesn't really matter, but I like to commemorate milestones in video form or in titles or whatever, because it's fun to look back on. Even though 16,000 is a weird one, that's not like a real milestone, you know. The next real one's 20,000. But anyway, yeah, thanks for sticking around. Only got 1 video out this month. My goal is always to do 2. Next month, probably also only gonna be 1, sadly, just because I got a lot of other shit going on. And yeah, anyway, shout out to you for watching. Shout out to the patrons. Never trust anyone who needs a haircut. Goodbye.